Former US President Joe Biden's son Hunter has had a pretty colourful past. He's been convicted on federal gun charges, though they were later vanished after his father pardoned him. He also pled guilty to several federal tax charges, which were also pardoned. And he has a pretty well-documented history of drug abuse. But now he's given an interview to YouTube's Channel 5 News. Now, that's nothing to do with the UK channel. It's just a YouTube channel. And it's his first interview since last year's election, when his ailing father was forced out of the race to make way for his then Vice President, Kamala Harris. And it's safe to say that Hunter isn't over it.
For some reason, the intelligentsia of the Democratic Party, with 2020 hindsight, believes that Joe Biden should have considered not running again, because of their perception that he was too old. And so then the drumbeat began. And the New York the New York Times, on a near daily basis, egged on by the Pod Save America saviors of the Democratic Party, with four white millionaires that are dining out on their association with Barack Obama from 16 years ago, living in Beverly fucking Hills, telling the rest of the world what black voters in South Carolina really want, or what the women in the waitress living outside of Green Bay, Wisconsin really believes. I mean, what the fuck? You remember this? Is that everybody talks about Joe Biden now as if he was somehow the choice of the Democratic Party. Bullshit. We lost Iowa, we lost New Hampshire, we came in second in Nevada. David Plouffe and David Axelrod went on TV. They said that there's no way Joe Biden can get the nomination, not a chance in the world. Mike Bloomberg's going to crush him in California. Elizabeth Warren's going to beat him in Massachusetts. There's going to get wiped out in Texas. He doesn't have the money to run. A lot of rural voters said, fuck you, we love Joe. A lot of urban voters said, fuck you, we love Joe. And they voted for him overwhelmingly.
I mean, he's definitely not wrong about the Pod Save America guys and their sort of type, the kind of circles they move in, that kind of smug, lazy intellectualism that often dominates a Democratic Party. But he's also talking there mostly about Biden's 2020 legacy, because it was, really clear to everyone that things had changed by the time 2024 rolled around. And it was in that period, ahead of the November elections last year, that actor George Clooney, a major Democratic Party donor, penned this piece for the New York Times. I love Joe Biden, but we need a new nominee. That was in July 2024. Now, Hunter had an opinion on that too.
George Clooney is not a fucking actor. He is a fucking, I don't know what he is. He's a brand. And by the way, and God bless him. You know what? He supposedly treats his friends really well. You know what I mean? Buys them things. And he's got a really great place in Lake Como. And he's great friends with Barack Obama. Fuck you. What do you have to do with fucking anything? Why do I have to fucking listen to you? What right do you have to step on a man who's given 52 years of his fucking life to the service of this country and decide that you, George Clooney, are going to take out basically a full-page ad in the fucking New York Times to undermine the president?
Then there's this bit where Hunter takes on the Trump family.
Meanwhile, these motherfuckers...
With Trump Mobile, we're going to be introducing an entire package of products.
They're selling gold telephones and sneakers and $2 billion investments in golf courses and selling tickets to the White House for investment into their meme coin.
Overnight, President Trump returning to the White House after a black tie gala for the biggest buyers of the Trump crypto coin.
The Qataris give him a jet, and the Emiratis put $2 billion into their cryptocurrency, and the Saudis are going to build a tower. And I mean, by the way, that's just what we see. What they are openly doing. They're openly doing. And nobody's batting an eye. Don Jr. is opening a club called the Executive Club in Georgetown, in which it is promised that you will be able to rub shoulders at the cost of a $500,000 initiation fee.
The $500,000 membership fee would make it the most expensive private membership club in the country after Mar-a-Lago.
To join the club with people and decision makers in the cabinet of his father.
Now, the launch party on Saturday night included a who's who from the Trump cabinet, with Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Attorney General Pam Bondi, SEC Chair Paul Atkins, Dr. Oz and a lot of others.
What is that other than literally the sale of influence? And by the way, that's just like a side thing for them.
There's probably pretty right about that. Although, the Trumps are a particularly brazen, peddler of influence or peddlers of influence, pretty brazen about enriching themselves through various crypto schemes, various merchandise. But it's not like Democrats haven't been guilty of that, maybe not to the same degree or quite so brazenly in the past, but certainly they've not been innocent of it themselves. Now, there's a lot more in that interview. It's like over 3 hours long. In it, he's extremely warm about Kamala Harris, but he's deeply scathing about the Democratic Party machinery. He also talks quite a lot about his recovery, while kind of bizarrely also giving somewhat clear instructions about how to make crack. So, hey, there's something in it for everyone. And it's been viewed 1.4 million times in just a day. Helena, I think this was actually the most that I've ever seen of Hunter Biden. And, I had a slightly uncomfortable feeling watching the interview. It seemed to some extent a little bit exploitative. To another extent, it was clearly like a guy who really wants to protect the reputation of his dad. There was also a kind of aspect which was like, is this a pitch into like political life, which seems unlikely to succeed? I don't know. What did you make of this interview and his interventions here?
I mean, no matter everything, I can't bring myself to dislike Hunter Biden. I know that he's not a particularly great person, but it's just the fact that he makes right-wingers so angry, essentially for no reason, just because he's related to the guy who was president. It just gives me a small soft spot for him that I really can't shake. But regardless, in terms of the content of the interview, especially the clips that we've just seen, I think you're right. I think that his criticisms of the Trump grift sphere are entirely on point. I couldn't disagree with any of that. But when it comes to Joe Biden, I understand. I understand that he is obviously wanting to defend his dad, and that's a natural inclination. But quite frankly, his claims are complete nonsense. Whilst I've been many times on this show, have been reasonably complimentary about some of the domestic policy regime of the Joe Biden administration that I think was unfairly maligned because of global economic headwinds that were outside of their control. There were plenty of things within their control they could have done to ensure that they didn't lose the election over the economy because of failures on things like letting certain benefit programs or certain Medicaid programs expire in 2023 when they could have extended them past the election, not using their power to be able to enact positive legislation like no wage cuts, being harder on people like Manchin and Sinema to ensure that things like the initial Build Back Better plan had gotten pushed through and they've been able to expand on the social programs that they said they wanted to do. Hunter Biden mentions that people from the progressives were behind Joe Biden. It was terrible. They got rid of his nominee without realizing that the progressives basically only got behind Joe Biden because they realized they didn't actually have the ear of the Kamala Harris campaign that was very establishment in nature. She was being implemented by the establishment as their candidate to ensure continuity, so there was no challenge. But in terms of the actual ear of the administration, it was the fact that Biden was there that people like Sanders got implemented into the Senate Budget Committee, or we had the Biden-Sanders Unity Task Force over policy, AOC being put on things like Green New Deal planning. So these were things that they had access to with Biden that they didn't with Kamala Harris, and why there was so little focus on economic policy from the Harris campaign than previously was in the Biden campaign that came in 2020. But on top of this, he didn't just get removed because people didn't like him or because people wanted a change of guard. There was internal polling, especially after the debate, that showed that they were going to have a loss by over 200 electoral college votes. That's what the internal polling was like months and months before they managed to convince Biden to step down. It was going to be a giant disaster. This man was so unfit for office in terms of his critical faculties on a basic level that he was basically having to be all of his presidential duties be subsumed by his own staffers who would wheel him out for public receptions that were basically all he would be able to manage to do. Hunter Biden goes on to say, well, he just traveled halfway around the world as an 80-year-old guy, and then he makes some mistakes when he's doing debates. I'm like, if you can't take on all of the incredibly busy schedule that a president can do because you're too old, then you're too old, right? That's not mitigation. That shows that we were right that he was too old. And that's before we get on to the fact that I know it's difficult to admit that your dad is responsible for hundreds of thousands of deaths and one of the biggest atrocities that we've seen in the modern era, but If you want to talk about them losing the election, there are huge swathes of people who stayed home because of their absolute disgust at Biden's foreign policy. And to be reticent to mention this because you can't bring yourself to at least admit that your own family lineage is responsible for mass death, like, well, then you don't really have a position that is defensible here. You can't really be asked to give an honest assessment of the reality of the removal of Joe Biden and the failure of the Democrats at the election, because again, their foreign policy blunders in a world where people did want inward investment and wanted the American government to stop being the world police, is again, that shows you that no matter whether you are central to the Democratic Party machinery or someone who's close with members of the party, unless you actually look at the real criticism, you're always going to miss the wood for the trees.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, because there was this denial about his cognitive state, Kamala Harris was sort of thrown into it quite late and just inherited that foreign policy. I mean, I don't think she had any particular interest in changing it, but there was certainly no thinking about it that might have affected that election. And yeah, you're also right about the debate, the polling after that. I mean, we can all remember those appearances that Biden made afterwards when he was addressing the nation or giving some sort of speech where he looked like he'd just been injected with the go juice. He was sort of kind of alert, but not quite there in various ways. And I think that one thing that actually the Biden administration could have done right from the beginning to make for an easier run in 2024 to sort of ameliorate the effects of that election and of the Trump campaign was that they could have secured Roe v. Wade in various ways. I mean, there could have been via executive orders or other mechanisms. People have got a lot of ideas about how they could do it, but they didn't do it. And that meant that actually the entire messaging of the Democrats' election was reproductive rights. That could have all have been taken care of, and then they would have had space to talk about the economic things, for example. But they made this determination that this trap that, in a way, the Republican-dominated Supreme Court had laid for them would be the central message of their campaign, and that was a politically deeply foolish thing to have done.